and welcome to another episode on the Future of Work podcast. This is a fantastic podcast that brings you all the latest trends that are impacting the world of work. Today, our session focuses on British enterprises in the United Arab Emirates. I'm joined this afternoon with Dr. Vic Benuena. Dr. Vic, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And our very special guest today is the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce, Katy Holmes. Katy, we're absolutely delighted to have you with us here in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, both of you. Thank you.
Katy, I know today is your 5th anniversary. I know you've been with the British Chamber of Commerce for 5 years today, so today is a very special occasion for you.
Thank you. Yes, I have to thank LinkedIn for all the notifications that I've had this morning to remind me.
That's brilliant. Congratulations. So, Katy, we'd like to start off by asking you, could you please tell us a little bit about the key objectives and mission of the British Chamber of Commerce here in the United Arab Emirates? I know that previously it was called the British Business Group, which I've attended some of their fantastic events. So the name change is there as well, but we'd like to really know a little bit more about the mission and what are the key objectives of the British Chamber of Commerce.
Sure. So, yes, it was the BBG, British Business Group Dubai Northern Emirates, for the last 37 years. So based on the British Embassy compound, a community group really was set up for all the British pioneers that came over that length of time ago, who were looking for a sense of community and their own kind of forming their own ecosystem. And over the last 37 years, there's this amazing rich tapestry of different chairs, different boards, different business teams, different embassy staff, different representatives in the UAE and the UK. And now we're at this point looking back on this, a lovely sort of patchwork of legacy that's got us to the point where we are now, which is one of the most, if not the most, active business group in the region. The transition to the British Chamber of Commerce Dubai was very natural, as we have been operating as such for this length of time. Our founding chair, who's still a member now, was actually delighted to hear when we did have the opportunity to change and rebrand, because he said it was always the intention of the Chamber of the BBG to do so. But we couldn't have done it without the support of our members, our stakeholders, the Dubai Chamber, who have an excellent relationship with here in the region, and also the British Chambers of Commerce in the UK.
Fantastic. That's really great. And I really love some of the events that you do, especially these networking events. They're absolutely brilliant. Really, I mean, I've been to some of them, very educational as well. And I feel it's like a sense of support for all businesses operating here in the United Arab Emirates.
Good. I'm glad you have that experience.
Yes.
We have over 1,000 members and we host over 70 events a year. So as you pointed out, there's networking, masterclasses, business briefings on thought leadership topics, golf days, family days, paddle tournaments, quiz nights. We're kind of all things to all people.
That's brilliant. So over the 5 years, Katy, that you've been, the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce, what are some of the trends that you've noticed, moving forward? I know there's a lot of British businesses setting up here. Could you share with us some of the key trends that you've observed?
Absolutely. So I actually started at the BBG as a marketing consultant. So I've only been enrolled for the last 3 years, but observing from afar and then very much in the heart. That obviously covered the pandemic. So if I may start at that point, we were at a thriving situation. It was sort of post-Brexit. We were seeing a lot of UK companies coming directly to us, to the Chamber. I'll refer to it as the Chamber because that's what we are now, just to help with branding, if that's okay. But it was the BBG at that point, working closely with the Department for Business and Trade. So it would be kind of technical, education, healthcare, energy. Particular missions would come over, and we were enjoying being that soft landing for those companies. So it was doing well. And then when COVID struck, when the pandemic struck, being a membership organisation focused on events, you can imagine that was one of our biggest revenue streams gone overnight. But we we weren't concerned about that in the immediate in the immediate present, excuse me. But what we were worried about was our members. So I noticed so many companies went to emails and webinars, and instantly that was a huge no for me, because telephone, we reached out, and actually over the phone with the board and the business team, we reached over 70% of our members to ask, how are you doing? What's the issues? How can we help? We also then issued a survey that went out to all of our members, and that information was so useful that we could provide a collective voice to Dubai Chamber, to the Ministry of Finance as well, with ideas of how to better support the SMEs particularly, because our UK PLC members were quite well supported here and back in the UK, but the supply chain really, really struggled during the pandemic. So the other business councils, the other international business councils here and in Abu Dhabi, replicated our survey so that we actually presented a collective voice of 6,000 businesses speaking about their pain points. So whilst it was a difficult time for everybody, that really put us in a fantastic position with our industry stakeholders, our members from an empathy perspective as well, which is so key, to then be able to come out of the pandemic stronger than ever, our relationships G2G stronger than ever, more stakeholders, and now we're enjoying that really, because I think there was, from a human touch perspective, something I'm really proud of us, that we really kind of supported our members through that difficult time.
That's great. And I saw from some of your communication that, you don't have to be British to join the British Chamber of Commerce. Could you just highlight that for us?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So, I've lived here for 12 years. It's the most welcoming place in the world. So to have a British Chamber of Commerce here, we're representative of the region. So there is a UK nexus. So if you're educated, you're working for a British company, or you have British family or clients, there is a screening process, but majority of time we welcome those that are supporting British expats and British brands in the region.
That's really great. So it's, I think enlarging the pool of networking opportunities and really getting that support to everyone who needs it. So do you have any sort of figures or key sectors? Because we want to know the significance of British enterprises here in the UAE, because we know that businesses are, of course, they create opportunities, they boost the economy, they support upskilling in terms of, for example, giving internship opportunities. So what kind of size are we talking about? How significant are British businesses here in the UAE?
So in terms of how many British businesses there are in the region?
Yes, and also like what sectors are they in, mainly?
Yeah, so being a 37-year-old organisation, we have an amazing archive that we can go into. And looking at the pie chart of printed out or faxed, I'm sure back then, there were 8 sectors represented through the chamber, and now we have 28 sectors. Brilliant. So these really range, and obviously you have the professional services, construction's a big one, education, healthcare. But certainly in the last couple of years, we've seen recruitment, HR, marketing, real estate, as you can imagine, but also health and wellness is really coming through from a sector perspective. So we probably see, the latest statistics are there's around 6,000 British businesses here in the region. We see a sixth of those on a daily basis. So it's a great cross-representation. I'd be surprised now if there were any other sectors that we hadn't seen through the membership. But really, there's everybody is represented.
Yeah,
there.
That's really fantastic. So it's good to know which sectors are booming, as well. From I guess like the skills that are needed to support these increasing business sectors as well. So I saw from Katy, I know you also have your own podcast. Is it Don't Do This, Do That?
Don't do that, do this.
Don't do that, do this.
Very close.
So it's really interesting where you interview British entrepreneurs coming in the UAE. And I've watched some of the episodes, really interesting. You know, young families leaving the UK with their children, coming here to start from scratch. It's really quite interesting to know about these and the experiences of people moving here. So what would you say attracts people to move and come here and set up their business? You know, as you mentioned, you also support SMEs and small businesses as well. From your interactions and interviews, what do you think attracts people to leave the UK and come and set up here?
Apart from the sunshine, it is lifestyle. I mean, I remember even through when my husband was moving across here initially, before we moved across as family, when he spoke to part of the interview process, he was speaking to people that were already based here, and that was the sell. It was the lifestyle. It was 9 to 5. You know, it wasn't the crazy hours that we were working in London. Being able to go to the beach at the weekend, just from a community perspective, that was the sell really. For me, I was due to go back to full-time work in central London with a baby, and I was pregnant. So really, the idea to come to Dubai and not have to work, that was honestly the main thing for me, because it was a lot to leave my family and my friends. But I was thinking of my immediate family, and I saw Dubai as an opportunity to have a lifestyle where I would be able to focus on being a mother.
Great. And I know from our previous conversations, you know, when we were preparing for this, you mentioned that you also checked with some people, what is it like being an expatriate, and it was all very positive.
Yes.
And that's why you decided to come as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I wanted to understand from friends that were expat children themselves, mainly growing through boarding school, and in other countries. And they were just, it's like having best friends all over the world. And I thought, quite happy with that. And it's been so true.
That's fantastic. So apart from the networking events that you do, Katy, you know, at the Chamber of Commerce, what other support mechanisms are there for small businesses or any British business? You know, what's available to them? How do you support these businesses who want to set up here? Or maybe for those who are already quite established, could you maybe share with us maybe some success stories or some examples?
Absolutely. So one of the membership benefits are member introductions. So depending on the level and the tier of membership, there's a certain amount that each member has to use. Amazingly, so many people don't use the facility. But to give you an example, a new member, quite a large FX house from London, came to us as a membership, and they asked for 12 introductions, and within 2 weeks they had 8 meetings. So that just gives you an idea, and they were delighted, obviously, as you can imagine. But the newsletter that goes out every week goes out on a Thursday, and that goes out to over 6,000 email addresses. So the click-through rate is extremely high. It's over 40%, which is well above the average click-through rate, which I suppose you expect as a membership, but even still, it's high. So we've had some great success stories of news articles that have gone through the newsletter that have been read in Hong Kong, for example, and business deals come out of just reading an article and hearing of somebody's proposition based in the UAE. But to be honest, the proposition for members that are either based here or based in the UK is very similar. Quite a few of our UK-based members appear to be here because they make the most of the facilitated introductions, the newsletter, and then on their business trips, with 70 events a year, there's normally something for them to drop into. So the business team's amazing. They're all really caring and conscientious and act like a secret sales team for all of our members. So the more they know about the members, the more likely they are to be, amplifying whatever our members are trying to do in the region. So it's a lovely ecosystem.
That's great. I know there's a special event happening in the UK that you'll be going to as well. Is that something related to the British Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, that's right. I was thinking, which special event? There's
quite
a few coming up. Yes, so it's the British Chambers of Commerce annual general meeting, their global trade conference at the end of June. And that will see over 150 CEOs of British chambers up and down the UK and internationally, and their presidents and their members, and lots of UK companies. The panel will be probably talking about the election,
Yeah.
I would imagine, if they're allowed. But also just looking at British business. I've been asked to. I'm on a panel talking about how Dubai is so successful. What are the secrets to having a business in Dubai versus having a business in the UK? So yeah, this is a good warm up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hope all the best with that event.
Thank you.
So we talked about the the advantages and reasons why people come and set up their business here. What kind of regulations or cultural factors should one be aware of when setting up here? Just like a general overview.
Yeah, so being open-minded, having a diverse team with diverse thinking is profitable ultimately. So I'm always surprised when companies don't embrace their local stakeholders, because ultimately that's where we're living. Dubai Chamber is an awesome function for people doing business. We work very closely with them, but they have 100 business groups, over 100 business groups, sector specific, under their umbrella. So that would be my advice to anybody coming along, is obviously connect with your international chamber, but also Dubai Chamber really is such a progressive organisation. And yeah, that would be my advice, definitely. But from a cultural perspective, yes, we are a wonderful eclectic mix. Even in our own business team, we represent quite a few nationalities. We're definitely not all British, but yeah, I find it fascinating. I mean, I love, even from a school's perspective, my daughter's, one of my favourite days in the year is on the WhatsApp. Class WhatsApp goes quite mad, but it's the International Day where everybody brings in a dish from their home nation, if you like. And so if you imagine a class of 28, there's probably about 19 different dishes representing all the different cultures that my children are mixing with every single day. And that's Dubai. It's everyone's sharing, everyone's trying the cuisine, everyone's embracing it. Everybody knows what's going on in each other's home countries because they're talking about it in the schools, whereas probably elsewhere it might be quite insular. So applying that to the business landscape, so many of our member firms will celebrate all international days because it's representing the individual that they're sat next to and understanding who that person really is.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in addition to what Katy said, there is some sort of advantage also in the labor market for new businesses coming to set up, both in terms of quantity and quality. The labor force is here. Almost 200 different country nationals wants to come here and find work. So if people were to come here to start their own business, the pool is there for them, unlike in some other geographical areas in Europe where countries are struggling with the pool of labor. So that's something quite significant to consider.
Great, absolutely. And since our podcast is about the future of work, Katy, we want to ask you maybe to give an opinion about what do you foresee as the future trends between UK and UAE business relations and trade?
Well, it's strong. There's that bilateral trade corridor is extremely busy. There's a lot of UK companies coming over here. So in the last year, 30% of our new members are UK companies that are either new to region or coming. So that's a huge percentage, really. So it's a bit of perhaps a brain drain from the UK a little bit. But there's also companies looking to go back to the UK. So we also support the other corridor, obviously working closely with the Department for Business and Trade. It's very much about import-export. So certain sectors, healthcare and tech, from a research perspective and knowledge transfer, there's huge amounts. Space as well. We've had an amazing business briefing on space, and that was the UK Space Agency Authority, I can't remember. But when they're coming over and sharing their best practice, but also taking a lot of best practice back with them as well. So there's the corridor for knowledge transfer is really strong as well.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Katy. I'm going to come now to Vic, because Vic, you have taught in Vietnam in a British school, British university in Vietnam. And we really want to see the role of British universities in supporting businesses and the skills of the future. So, thinking about your time, in Vietnam and working for a British university, what attracts students to British education all over the world, really? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I won't start with the flag because the flag obviously is very attractive. In my experience, what I've noticed both in Vietnam, the UK itself, and through my own research is essentially the heritage behind British education. But quite apart from that, British education has a long history behind it, starting with Oxford University, 1090, followed by Cambridge, St. Andrews, and other institutions such as Birmingham University, University of London, and so on and so forth. It's a huge history behind how universities do things, particularly the business schools. We are very adaptive. If you think about the generations before us, many years ago, to understand someone's personality, you probably would study phrenology, which was something put forward by a German psychologist, Franz Gall. We don't do that anymore because we know through research that those things are no longer effective in defining people's personality. We move on from that. If you remember, many years ago, there was a guy called Cesare Lombroso, Italian guy. And his position was to sort of characterize people in different forms based on the contours of their face and facial features. We have moved on from that, but that time, that was quite heavily used in the labor market. We move on to Pittman, Isaac Pittman, who brought in stenographer, secretaries in our workplaces, and also typewriting many years ago. We have a long history behind British education. We are very adaptive. So students really like this element of quality, which has history behind it, quality, which is derived from research, credibility, trust. Plus also, they just think that the British people do education much better than most other places. And I don't think that sort of thinking is misplaced because you can just look at any statistics. If you Google anything about where to study, postgraduate or undergrad, you're likely to find United States or UK coming to the top all the time. So students are aware of this. They have always been aware of what quality is. They know that in the UK we do a lot of research, and they can distinguish between the different qualities of offering in the market. The same way, if I were to buy a car, a quality car, I would probably look into a Japanese car, perhaps Lexus. So British education is a Lexus of the educational industry.
Great. So with that history, tradition, and quality, as you said, is really what attracts students. But what can British universities do to adapt, or let's say adjust their learning to the needs of the future? Because of course, there are new skills that are required out there. So what do you think they could do in that sense?
Okay, so business schools are very resilient. They've been in existence for a very long time. University of Birmingham Business School is the oldest business school in the whole of the UK, one of the oldest in the world. Birmingham Business School was in existence around 1902, thereabouts. So if we weren't doing things correctly, we wouldn't survive the changes in the world. Leaving that aside, what I think business schools should be doing more essentially, particularly these days, is being more adaptable to the generations that we have around us. So the newer students that are coming through our doors, they have very different mindset. They have very different environment that they grow in. So it's quite important to take this into account. If we go back to how we were doing education before, the lecture-centered approach, it probably doesn't work in most institutions that are futuristic. It's quite important to ensure that students get engaged and we sort of involve them in some of the discussions that we have. We also engage with people like Katy in terms of what they do as far as the business landscape is concerned. having that dialogue between us as institutions and the industry is quite vital. But sometimes if we just decide that this is the way to go, we might be living in silos. So you and I have been doing that, Dr. Mona. We have a huge industry engagement, and we have learned from that. There's a huge portfolio of things that we have done that we wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't, engaged with industry the way we've been doing. Quite apart from that, AI is very disruptive these days. And I'm sure Katy will agree with me that in our field, we have both challenges and opportunities with AI as it stands at the moment. Students, if given the chance, would want to use AI as a shortcut to their studies. We have to find a way to mitigate that without telling students that AI is not the future. AI would define, in my view, about 40% of what's going to happen in the future. And so we have to work with industry to ensure that we understand what they want AI to do for them and how we teach that in our classrooms. I believe people who work in marketing, for example, will heavily rely on AI. PR campaigners may rely heavily on AI. People who do coding would need AI. What we wouldn't do as institutions is to encourage students to use AI to generate a piece of assignment or coursework, which they will claim as their own and want to get marked for. So those are the sort of things that we'll be sort of talking about going forward, but more essentially, having that dialogue with industry and BCCD and allied organizations who help us a lot going into the future, because the traditional way of teaching, it's probably gone.
Yeah. And I really couldn't agree more with, this bridge between, universities and businesses is really essential, because ultimately we are preparing the students for these businesses. And it's really wonderful to have conversations like these with you, Katy, but what I really wanted to focus on now is maybe looking at a student perspective. And I know you've been talking to a lot of young graduates and some of the challenges that they face. What's been coming up from your conversations? What challenges do they face joining or trying to find jobs here in the UAE?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Vic's already said about the disconnect. I see a huge disconnect. And I sympathise with the generation coming into the workplace, because I actually see them as making positive impact with their boundaries. They're coming into interviews and saying, "Oh, this is the way that I like to work, and this is how you're going to get the best out of me." And the other person on the side of the desk is like thinking, "Wow, if that was me 20 years ago when I had to stay until midnight just to, the FaceTime is so important, everything." But I actually really like the disruptive nature. We had an AI workshop this morning, which was probably one of the most intense learning experiences I've had in a long time. It was really, really interesting. We had lots of senior leaders that were there. We were talking not just, it was every level of AI you can imagine, not just ChatGPT, but even sort of these agents talking to each other and taking over sort of human connection. It's quite frightening. But one thing in the discussion afterwards, one of our members said, "Why are people fearing the jobs that AI will take? Does anybody actually really want to work?" And she's an environmentalist, very champion for sustainability. And her idea is that if there are jobs being taken that require humans normally, then perhaps the humans then can spend more time on sustainability and ESG and things that robots and AI can't quite do themselves, the hands-on stuff. So that's just still percolating in my mind at the moment. I quite like that idea, is that AI is AI for good, but with regulations. And to your point around for your students generating work through AI, most people I work with are doing that. So you think it's almost like when I was learning maths, which I wasn't very strong at in school, I thought, why can't I use a calculator? Because when I'm not in school, I'm going to use a calculator. So it's the same for AI. You almost think, why not let them use it now? Because they're going to use it in the future anyway. But I know critical thinking is a really important soft skill.
It is, yes.
So, keep humans in business.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So it's nice to see what the new generation are looking for and what they want, what would make them happy in the workplace. And that actually ties on really nicely with the Global Workplace Report 2023. Interestingly, they asked people a question. They said, what would you change to make your workplace better? And the answer wasn't better pay. That didn't come first. It was actually 41% of respondents actually said engagement and culture.
Oh, yes, I can believe it.
Then came pay and benefits after that. And the survey digged a little bit deeper into, okay, what do you mean by engagement and culture? And it was things like everyone should get recognition for their contribution, more open communication with managers, giving everyone a fair chance for promotions, and having clear goals and a stronger guidance. So in your opinion, Katy, and from all these conversations you've been having with people, why do you think engagement and culture was number one? It's the number one aspect that they would like to change to make them feel happier in their work.
It correlates perfectly with the Cigna Vitality Report. So Cigna is one of our annual strategic partners, and they publish a report specifically on well-being in the workplace, and the results correlate exactly the same. So when we reviewed that in detail, and also just feeling it on an individual level, why wouldn't you want to work somewhere where you're appreciated, or be somewhere that you're appreciated? We spend a horrifying amount of time at work. So if you're not happy, then it's just not fulfilling. And social media plays a huge part of this with the fear of missing out, that a lot of companies are now sharing their onboarding process or they're amplifying their working culture on social media. So companies, from a profitability perspective and a brand reputation perspective, should be looking at that response very, very seriously, realizing to genuinely provide a great working environment, it's win-win for everybody.
Absolutely, that's great. So your conversations are confirming some of these findings, and that's really great. So we'd like to now come to the topic of work-life balance, which I know you're very passionate about, Katy.
I try.
But I'll throw this question to Vic first of all, because we always focus on working moms, but as working fathers as well, we'd like to get your perspective on why is it important to have, this culture of understanding, and how do you cope with your responsibilities being a father and your work demands as well? Because we don't really hear from fathers, right? It's as much as we do from moms. So please share with us your perspective, Vic. Yeah.
Well, I will start off with a positive, that changes have been made over the years. Germany introduced paternity leave, for example, and many other Scandinavian countries followed suit. And in the UAE, I heard recently there's some sort of discussion to introduce a much more generous paternity leave for fathers as well. In my experience, it's quite challenging to combine any sort of career with bringing up children. That's because the children will always choose who they want to affiliate with. And in my case, it turns out to be my daughter who wants most of the attention at home. And that's not misplaced psychologically speaking either. Sigmund Freud talked about that Oedipus complex and Electra complex. Depending on who you have as a child, they will either choose the father or the mother. In the case of most fathers, it's the female who wants their attention. But quite apart from that, if you live in a country where there's so much activity going on, we wouldn't define Dubai as a laid-back country. It's a 24-hour economy. Mm-hmm. So every time, every day, every month, every year, something is going on. Taking kids to the mall, taking them to the park, getting them to school, picking them back from school, and finding the money to pay their fees is extraordinarily demanding on both parents. But as a father, We have not been in the sort of equation when it comes to this sort of arrangement that gives flexibility. But I'm glad that it has started. And most progressive universities, including the one I work for, they have recognized this, that both males and females should be taken into account when it comes to flexi work. I would hope that other universities do the same, and I hope that other industries follow up as well. Because if you live in countries like the UAE and places like Hong Kong, Singapore, New York, and that sort of thing, it's quite challenging to bring up kids whilst working at the same time. All I can say is that I'm glad that things are changing. They are not the same as what my dad experienced when he was looking after us. So it's quite all positive these days.
Great.
Yeah.
And how was your experience, Katy, returning to work after having children, trying to, find your place again, trying to convince employers that you do have that experience, but you just had that gap? Could you share with us your experience in this sense?
Definitely. This is something I feel really, really passionate about, because as a chamber, we're working with other stakeholders to encourage companies to recruit more consciously. So it's amazing that you're experiencing that with your wonderful employer, Dr. Vic. Yeah. Looking at male and female, so working parents generally, looking at, living in as an expat, many women, if we just select women for now, come over here and there may be a gap. So either they say trailing spouse, but I'd say trailing talent. So it will be a woman that's taken a break either to raise a family or settle in the country without children, but looking to return to work. So, there's rising costs in Dubai now. So there are more people needing to have a two-parent or a two-family income. So, but it's also if you are a working parent and you have the school pickups, you don't have the relatives that you would in the UK. The grand pickup at the school gates, that kind of thing. We don't have that ecosystem. So it's understanding that there are women, a lot of very, very talented women that would like to work but can only work between the hours of say 8:30 and 2. But when they work, they are working extremely efficiently and also for a lot less than you might pay for a full-time person that's not doing the same, if that makes sense. So we looked at this real dichotomy. So we had owner-managed businesses where the founders were scaling at huge at pace, but they couldn't afford the senior counsel around them. So the typical kind of chief marketing officer, head of legal, head of finance, they wouldn't be able to hire that. But actually, if they connected with somebody that had that experience, there are teaching assistants in schools that are ex-Magic Circle, but they can't get back into their work and use their expertise because they can't find a role that would allow them to pick up their children. It's just crazy. So my own experience was I was just looking about 5 years ago, or more than that actually, because I started volunteering because it was my only option I could see. I looked at freelancing, but then the setup fee for a freelancer was exactly the same cost as somebody with a multinational company. I couldn't have afforded it. It wouldn't have made sense at all. That's changed now, obviously, with all the different visas that are available, making entrepreneurs a much, thriving economy for an environment for entrepreneurs. So I was volunteering at a school as a classroom assistant for an amazing place called the Rashid Centre for the People of Determination. It's a school setting for children that are physically or mentally need additional needs. So it's an amazing centre. Bit of plug there because they're incredible. So I was classroom assistant there, and then just through a connection through my husband, actually, because I'm ex-Barclays, I met the country manager of Barclays, Andrew Mortimer, who's actually now our chair at the Chamber. And back then he was deputy chair, and he asked me to have a look at what was the BBG. And I said, well, I've only got sort of 3 hours a day, 3 mornings a week because I'm volunteering. He said, no, it's fine. Just come along and see what you think. And well, the rest is history really. But I found myself, I didn't lack confidence. I mean, that's something I have to say. And probably because I felt supported by those that had hired me because they felt that I had something to offer. It wasn't that I lacked confidence. It was more that I was so surprised that things hadn't moved on as quickly as I thought from when I'd left the industry sort of 4 or 5 years before that. So I think the key is to start quite slowly, as I did, and just build my confidence. But absolutely, the environment is critical. If I'd been working with somebody that was highly critical of me, had a bias that I wasn't working as much or as hard as I could because I could only work sort of 3 hours, it would never have worked. But I feel extremely fortunate to be in a position where I've got an amazing team who I also support having flexible working that allows me to have flexible working. And then I have my clear boundaries, my non-negotiables, where I pick up my daughters from school. It's not something I enjoy, I have to say. Being in the, as in getting there, the traffic to get to the school, the stress of leaving one place to get to the other. But the minute that they get in the car, as a parent, that is, and they're 11 and 13, it's the only window that I get where I have a captive audience before we get home and they're upstairs and the door's shut and the music's on. That hour, as it turns out to be now, it used to be 15 minutes with traffic, but we talk, we listen to music. Sometimes they decompress. Sometimes they're quite emotional, could be angry. They're processing something that they've had happen at school. If I don't pick them up for whatever reason and I come home later in the day, it's evident that they haven't been able to process the day. So I'm very, very fortunate that I work where I can have that privilege.
That's the school run. Yes, we know what that's like. So I'm one of those as well, always doing the school run. And I really agree, it's that opportunity to talk, about the day, and because you have them locked in the car, they can't go anywhere else. Yeah. So they, explain how the day was, what their key events, high moments. They can have a little fight as well,
Yes.
while sitting there. But it's really great that some organizations are really giving that flexibility and trust to their employees.
The trust is really key. And when companies challenge me sometimes around flexible working and saying that it's not working for them, I always say, well, why did you hire them? If you can't trust somebody to do their job in a flexible way and still be able to, and still delivering, then why would you hire somebody that you can't trust?
Yeah, that's great. So what advice would you give, Katy, to aspiring women who also want to be successful like yourself, getting leadership positions while trying to also balance their family needs?
Gosh, I'm not sure work out what your boundaries are and your non-negotiables. My toxic trait is I'm a people pleaser, so I could exhaust myself on a daily basis trying to please everybody and putting myself last. What I've tried this year, I've really focused on myself as well, so my health and my wellness, fitness. I'm obviously this is on video. You're gonna see I'm not a supermodel, but in the sense of I'm really enjoying saying I need to carve out time for myself, because my mental health, my battery power I'm making clearer decisions. My children are seeing that I'm doing it, and it's encouraging them to do their sports. So not every week is like that, trust me. Some weeks I just sit and don't move, but the last 3 weeks, because it's all in stages, have been a nice pattern, a nice routine that I'm getting into, and I'm feeling the benefits. Because, you can't pour from an empty cup. So I'm looking at things to fill my cup first.
That's wonderful. And we've got time for one last question. I'll ask it to both of you, actually. The role of networking. I know, Katy, from your previous discussions, you love networking.
I do.
And, we'll also ask, Vic, your perspective on why this is important, especially for the young generation. So I'll start with Dr. Vic first. What's the role of networking in supporting the young generation, especially, young graduates, to connect, to learn and grow?
In my view, I think there are several factors that we can take into account when we think of networking. the first one that comes to mind is knowledge acquisition. If you live in a silo, you might assume you know everything. But once you expose yourself to the network around you, then you can tell from other people that what you knew before is either outdated, not accurate, or perhaps not relevant to where you are. So cultural context is very, very important. So if you move to a new country and you decide to lock yourself up, as I did for some time when I was in Vietnam, you don't tap into the local knowledge or the culture or the way of doing business. So it's quite vital that our new generation, or regardless of the generation that we're talking about, it's very important that if you find yourself either in your own indigenous place or you've moved out to another place, you tap into the resource of people who are there either on the internet or in places like the chamber or industry activities that are organized. Get engaged, go there, speak to people, ask their opinion, learn from them, share your experience as well. And I would encourage our students to do the same because sometimes we notice you and I probably will be in the same situation. Students feel intimidated when they are in a different environment. So you find students coming from a culture where there is power distance. You have to do as people say and listen to authority. They sort of don't want to engage with a different type of culture. But this is something we encourage in our class through teamwork that students need to engage. And we will encourage them to take this to the workplace while they are looking for a job. Get on LinkedIn. Do the right thing. Create a personal brand for yourself on LinkedIn and ensure that you do what is professional. Things that are inappropriate, feature on LinkedIn. If you go to events, image is quite vital. It's hard for me to define what image is from a man's perspective per se, but all through my life, I believe the way you present yourself is how you'll be judged. So it's quite vital that students note this and then they do the right thing when they network.
Absolutely. And for Katy, I know you actually enjoy networking.
Yes, I'm a rare species. Yeah, that was excellent advice, what you just shared then. It really was. And yeah, not everybody likes networking, and I'm really conscious of that. So even speaking to members, so we have networking in mornings and evenings, but they're structured to get the best out of that. So we introduced a speed mentoring, which is now speed networking. But I would love for your students to come along to that event because for 6 minutes you sit opposite somebody that's an expert or has longevity in the region. But actually what worked brilliantly when we did the speed mentoring is reverse mentorship, as you mentioned. So it's knowledge transfer, not just what I know, but it's hearing what somebody else has to say. So it's 25 couples and then the inner circle kind of moves around. So you speak to everyone on the other side and the energy is amazing. We've had one last week at DIFC and it was so funny because there were people walking past and their necks were nearly coming off because they're thinking, what's going on here? Because the buzz was amazing. And actually we had 2 people there that were new to the region. Funny enough, one was from knew the British Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, so he's just moved over here. 2 days in Dubai, obviously had a positive experience with the British Chamber in Vietnam, came along to us and just said, I just knew that I'd find kindred spirits here. I felt a bit lonely. And I thought, right, I'm going to get out and I'm going to go to a networking event. So for me as an includer, I love providing those opportunities, but I'm always in everyone in the business team will always, they're like spotters. They look around the room and if anybody's not taking part or they look a bit nervous, somebody will always go over to them and speak to them and introduce them into a circle because it's not for everybody. But the majority of people don't like networking. So if you think that and it's your mindset going into a room thinking nobody really wants to be here, then that should help your confidence to believe that someone will be glad for you to speak to them.
Yeah, that's great. I took some of my students to like a networking event and I could see how nervous they were. So we did like a practice. So we, met the first person. And I just said to them, these are some students, they're a bit nervous. And she said, look, I'm nervous as well because I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
And the giggles started and, immediately they felt, oh, we're not the only, people to feel nervous. So
Absolutely.
yeah, great. Wonderful. Well, Katy, that's all we've got time for. Vic and Katy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you so
enjoyed,
much.
the episode today. Thanks for your time.